A few days before Black Friday in 1929, an unknown analyst wrote a report titled "Stock Market is on the Eve of Collapse." He predicted everything would crash, and in October, when the worst economic downturn in US history happened, this guy became known as a prophet of doom. His name was John Maynard Keynes. He wasn't famous, he wasn't rich, but he saw what no one else could. It turns out his analysis from 1929 is still relevant today, and understanding it might just be the most important thing you do all year. In 1928, everyone wanted to get into stocks. People borrowed money. They bought on margin and paid for stocks with the hopes of making millions overnight. The more prices rose, the more people speculated. Eventually, it became impossible. By 1929, over 90% of all listed companies were trading above their actual value. At the time, this wasn't seen as a problem because prices kept going up. But even though everyone was making money, Keynes knew something was wrong. Unlike others, Keynes had seen the dark side of economics. In World War I, he worked as a Treasury official helping Britain finance the war effort. He saw how ordinary people suffered while the wealthy got richer, and by the end of the war, he realized something needed to change. So he wrote a book called The Economic Consequences of Peace. In it, he argued that if Germany was crushed with huge reparations, it would damage the whole world. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. Keynes gained fame overnight and became an advocate for peaceful negotiations. He showed that someone like him, without political connections or lobbying power, could influence the future of the world. This gave him confidence to speak up about the stock market bubble. He wrote to a friend, "It is not a case of suspending judgment until the facts are ascertained. It is a case of drawing conclusions from the facts which are ascertainable." All this is nonsense. Keynes believed that there was nothing logical about the price increases. There was no real growth, only speculation, and that worried him. He said, "Speculation is a vice. When it merely means buying now and selling later for a profit, it is harmless enough. But when it leads to anything more, it becomes a dangerous addiction." In other words, as long as everyone makes money, speculation is fine, but if some people lose money, then it's harmful. And Keynes was right. When the bubble burst, newspapers called him a prophet of doom. His analysis was so spot on that it made him famous. But just a few years later, he disappeared from public view. You see, after the crash, Keynes went back to his old life and started managing investments for wealthy individuals. But as the economy recovered, he became depressed. He said, "Hardly anything in the world," he wrote to a friend, "can give a more absolute index of the state of our collective unconscious than these damn stock market quotations." Then in 1936, Keynes did something crazy. He quit his job and retired to his country home, where he lived quietly. But why? Why did he disappear after being so successful? Well, it all comes down to this. You see, throughout his life, Keynes collected books and documents on economics, politics, and science. He read hundreds of papers a day and filled notebooks with ideas, and although he was brilliant, he struggled with mental health issues. Doctors diagnosed him with borderline evil, schizophrenia, and clinical depression. Some believe he had bipolar disorder, and when he experienced a nervous breakdown in 1937, he decided to take a break. However, he didn't stay away for long. 2 years later, World War II began, and once again, Keynes answered the call for help. This time he managed Britain's financial response to the conflict. Once again, he saw firsthand how wars affect people's lives. And when it was over, he tried to apply his lessons to peacetime. Keynes continued working until 1946. Then he passed away at the age of 62. But during his lifetime, Keynes was mostly ignored. Most people either didn't know about him or simply dismissed his ideas. For example, Alan Greenspan, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, didn't even know who he was. In 1999, Greenspan declared the era of new economy where investors can make millions with a click of a mouse. And as we know, that ended badly. Or take Paul McRae, a legendary investor who successfully predicted the 1987 stock market crash. After that, he vanished from public view for 2 decades. He returned in 2007, warning of a housing market collapse, but his message was ignored until the crisis hit. So why does any of this matter? Because Keynes identified a behavior that is repeated again and again throughout history. See, we tend to ignore the warnings of those who go against the crowd. We call them prophets of doom and ignore their warnings. But sometimes they turn out to be right. In 1929, Keynes warned about the dangers of speculation and said that it would end badly for some. Then, in 1937, when the market was recovering, he said speculative activities like gambling have their place in human life, so long as they are recognized for what they are and do not form the basis of any serious economic policy. In other words, speculation has its place, but it shouldn't be part of a serious plan. However, his warnings were ignored. Instead, people kept borrowing money to buy stocks and houses, and when it collapsed, the whole world suffered. Then, from 1940 to 1945, Keynes focused on winning the war. But at the end of it, he noticed that despite the sacrifices, nothing had changed. He said, "We shall try to return to what was normal before the war." Many things that were normal then were not normal at all, but only pseudo-norms. And we shall not be truly normal until we correct what was pseudo in our pre-war world. In other words, even though the war brought many changes, it also brought a lot of bad things. However, after the war, no one listened to him. People were too busy rebuilding their lives and making up for lost time. And although Keynes kept writing, he became pessimistic about the future. In 1945, he wrote, "The world is not ruled by the best brains, and the efficient will always be dragged down to the level of the least efficient." In other words, the smartest people don't always win. Sometimes they get pulled down by average people. And that's exactly what happened. After the Second World War, Keynesian economics dominated the Western world. His ideas helped rebuild Europe and prevent another Great Depression. But since then, new challenges emerged. Keynes never addressed inflation. He assumed that prices would remain stable. But then came the 1970s oil crisis, and high inflation shocked economies around the world. Keynes also failed to predict the rise of China. His theories assumed that Western countries would continue growing indefinitely. But today, as many emerging countries surpass developed ones, we have to rethink what he taught us. Most importantly, Keynes was ignored when he spoke about speculation. Today, we live in a world where companies can borrow trillions of dollars and speculate on even bigger returns. When this works, everyone makes money. But when it doesn't, the whole world suffers. So here are 3 ways to think about Keynesian economics today. No. 1. Remember that markets don't always make sense. Just because everyone buys something doesn't mean that it's a good idea. If you want to get rich, you have to think different. Number 2, keep calm when things go wrong. We tend to panic when markets fall, but this is exactly when opportunities appear. So instead of panicking, look for deals. Number 3, understand that we can't grow forever. Eventually, even the greatest economies slow down. So be prepared for anything. Don't borrow money for risky investments. And remember that what goes up must come down. Now, if you want to learn the basics of finance in 60 seconds, watch this video. Next, if you're not subscribed yet, definitely consider subscribing and joining our community. It's free. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to check out the Legend playlist for more stories like this. Thank you for watching, and until next time.